Welcome to everyone to our April webinar called Best Practice in Preparing an R&D Tax Relief Claim. I'm Suze, Commercial Manager here at WhisperClaims, and delivering our session today is Jen Badger and Ian Cashin, our in-house R&D tax experts, gurus, Yodas of the scheme, and all things eligibility related. We're taking a short break from our eligibility content to bring you all a one-stop shop how-to on best practices when preparing an R&D tax claim on behalf of your clients. The tips and advice we are going to be sharing today are not new or groundbreaking, and we've almost certainly touched on one or more of them in the past sessions. But today we've collated this information into 4 manageable steps for you to take away and implement. Just for anyone who does not know that much about us, a quick intro. We are WhisperClaims, a technology company focused on helping accountants grow their businesses. Our R&D tax software allows our users to build new revenues, either by launching their own in-house R&D service or by introducing a framework that increases throughput and capacity with no need to outsource. Firmly sitting alongside our transformational software is our comprehensive support suite, and our current subscribers joining us today will be very familiar with Jen and Ian, as they also head up our support lines and are available to help and advise on any scheme, eligibility or app-related queries through our various channels, which is phone, email, live chat, and also through our community WhatsApp and Facebook groups. Okay, so today's session will be less structured than some of our previous events and more of a fireside chat, if you like. We'll be happy on this occasion to take questions at any point. We will still have our dedicated Q&A section at the end, so do have your Q&A boxes up ready and be raring to go. If anybody would like to chat to us, please use your chat box, and you can obviously toggle your settings according to your preferences, and the same for the Q&A box as well. Remember, you can toggle settings according to your preferences or send anonymously if you prefer. That's it from me for now. Jen, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Suze. Someone's just popped up saying someone's got an issue with the link. Can you deal with that while we get started? Thanks, Suze. Okay, so as Suze said, it's a bit more of a chat today, rather than, obviously, because in the end best practice can be a matter of opinion, and there's no, as we've been saying as we've been sort of preparing for this, there's no one right way to do it. There's quite a lot of wrong ways to do things, but there's definitely not one prescriptive, this is exactly how you have to prepare an R&D claim. So a bit more Ian and I, and actually Suze, sharing our experience of kind of preparing claims, working with clients, and what we have observed to be the best ways to go about things through our time doing this. So what we're going to talk about, I will continue to bang my drum about HMRC and what acceptance of claims means. And then we're going to talk about the kind of 4 key pillars of preparing R&D tax claims. So knowledge, cooperation, consistency, and openness. And we'll talk about what we mean about that and give you some sort of examples of what we've seen that's good and bad. And then, as Sue said, we'll jump into our Q&A. Because it's a bit more unstructured this time, obviously, if you have a question that's pertinent to what we're currently talking about, or even observations or experiences you want to share, just throw that into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to it as we go along. Okay, so first thing, and as I say, this is my usual banging of the drum. What we get a lot in these sessions or in response to things is, oh, well, we've done that and HMRC's accepted the claim. We've done a claim for this kind of thing. We know someone down the pub told me that they've managed to claim for this particular type of company, and HMRC accepted it. So just to make it clear, acceptance in the realm of R&D tax relief doesn't have a huge amount of meaning. So all providers, I'm sure a lot of people on this call, have 100% success rates on their website. It doesn't have a huge amount of meaning because with the number of claims that go into HMRC, it's really, really, really unlikely that they read or check every single one in detail. So they all get processed. Obviously, most of them get paid out. But what, from our observation, it appears to be that things are checked, they're kind of paid out, and then HMRC have certain criteria that they're not going to tell anyone about, and they'll pick some of them for that in-depth deep dive into the numbers, the narrative, and all that kind of thing. And potentially those are the ones that the inquiries are opened into. So all you know when HMRC pays out is that they haven't opened an inquiry yet. They haven't asked any questions yet. There's a good chance they won't, but it doesn't mean they've accepted it, that they've read it, they've accepted the claim is eligible. It's just they don't have the manpower to look at every single claim and make a definite decision about eligibility. So the only time you can ever say that a claim has been fully accepted by HMRC is when it's gone through an inquiry and you have that kind of rubber stamp that you've answered all the questions and HMRC has accepted that it is eligible. So yeah, key point on that, there's no such thing as acceptance. So if you've seen bad behaviors, bad practice in the past, and the person's got away with it, it doesn't mean that that's okay, or that HMRC would be okay with it if they knew about it. I can see there's a quick question come in about how long do HMRC have to come back and question a claim? Essentially, any time. It depends what they suspect. So it's with any other tax arrangement. So it could be 2 years. If they suspect something worse, it's 7 years. If they suspect full-on fraud, then I think they've got up to 20 years to come back. So you can't say for sure, even if it's been 18 months, 2 years. I've seen clients who've gone into aspect inquiry with HMRC have then many, many years of R&D claims opened up because the rest of their tax affairs are being looked into. So you can't guarantee it's not going to be looked at. Okay, so I'll get done off my high horse now. And we'll talk first about knowledge. So above all else, in terms of best practice, preparing an R&D claim, you have to understand HMRC's eligibility criteria. You cannot do this without having a good understanding of their criteria. Obviously, we have people coming to us, starting to work with our software who've never done this before. But the first thing we'll say to them is you have to get that knowledge. You have to have some grounding. So Ian and I had this wee discussion yesterday. We both have our favorite parts of the CIRD, but 81900 and 81300 both explain the definition of R&D for tax purposes. If you haven't read and understood those, you should not be doing a claim, just absolutely not. The other kind of key things you want to know is what's the definition of R&D, and definition of an SME. So that's CIRD 9100, the categories of qualifying expenditure, and at a bare minimum, the treatment of grants, so subsidised expenditure and how that should be treated. And obviously, I'd say you can read the more niche parts as and when they become relevant to a particular claim. Obviously, there's even now, Ian and I have been doing this for kind of 10, 12 years each. And there's still things people ask us, so you go, I actually don't know. I'm going to have to go back to CIRD and read up on that. The other point to make before I kind of throw this open to anything Ian and Suze want to say, always go to the CIRD. Okay, you can see in every R&D provider, including our own website, will have blogs about what does eligibility mean, what's eligible expenditure, all that kind of thing. And those are really good as a starting point. But unless you're absolutely sure that they are a knowledgeable and ethical provider, you cannot take any kind of third-hand digested information as the truth. It's always best to go back to the CIRD. And I have to say that Ian and I will quite often actually end up in the Corporation Tax Act, because the CIRD is HMRC, I suppose, summarising everything. And there are, for very, very niche questions, it will come down to the exact wording of the legislation itself. Obviously, you probably, doing the number of claims that our clients would do, you're unlikely to come up against that. But if you're doing lots of claims, or in our case, seeing a lot of claims going through, there are times when you will have to go right to the source and look at the legislation. Did you have anything else to say on this, Ian?
No, pretty much you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's quite evident that our conversations are at times quite boring to people outside of that kind of circle. Yeah, when you've got favorite sections of the corporate intangibles manual, then you need to get out into the sunshine a little bit more often. Yeah, I think we have a duty of care to our clients, and when I say we, I mean as a provider of R&D tax relief services. So in other words, everybody on this call who's providing it to their end user client, you have a duty of care to that person to make sure that they're not exposed to something and having to sit in front of HMRC and explain their tax affairs. The most important part is that you understand the legislation yourself, so that you can explain that to your client, because at the end of the day, your client is somebody who's going about their own business. They're doing something that potentially is technical. They're not a tax expert, and it's your responsibility to educate them and let them know what it is where you want to talk about when you go to see them. Yeah, that's pretty much kind of my take on that, really.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think obviously we've moved to the next slide now, but it is really important that you can impart that knowledge to your clients. In the end, the way the legislation is written, the way the CIRD is written, it's the competent professional in the claimant company that's making that, in the end, the ultimate judgment on what is eligible and what's not of the projects they've done. Obviously, you can advise them, you can help them, you can guide them, but they're the ones that know the project in depth. And if they don't understand what eligibility is, you're never going to have that good communication around it.
Yeah.
I think there's another point to make, and I think you'd agree here, Ian, that it's also about your own, you could really damage your own reputation without the knowledge. So I'm thinking of even back when I did do this as a consultant, there were a couple of times that I got sent into clients, and actually I could easily have gone a long way down the road with them if I didn't have that in-depth understanding of preparing a claim, when it turned out they weren't eligible at all. So we did work with one company that did, it was a kind of design agency, an engineering design agency. So they did a lot of prototyping, but everything they did was on behalf of other SMEs. So they just didn't have a claim, even though the work they did was really eligible. But without that in-depth knowledge of how subcontracting works and how the rules are, that would have been really embarrassing. If we'd gone all the way to the point of preparing a claim, and even, the worst case scenarios of it goes to HMRC and they come back and say, well, no, you can't claim. It's very clear you can't claim. And I don't know if you've ever seen that kind of thing as well, Ian, where people have gone too far with claims because they don't understand it well enough.
Yeah, absolutely. A very similar situation. I had somebody come to us trying to explain that they were in an inquiry situation already at that point. So whoever was advising them at the time had taken it too far and actually had submitted a claim, when actually it turns out that none of the actual projects actually belong to them, unfortunately. So in exactly the same situation, really. Yeah.
And it's something I spend a lot of my time advising people when we do our training sessions, is that there's a lot of times that you might not be able to make a claim, or it might not be worth your time or the clients. If you don't know how to assess whether they are an SME or would have to claim as a large company, the amount that a company can get back and what they can claim for is so much smaller in RDEC that you might find that actually an RDEC claim isn't worth it. And if you've gone all the way through preparing it on the assumption that the benefit is going to go through the SME scheme, where they're going to get, 25, 30% back, and suddenly they're looking at 10% and they can't claim for the subcontractors, it's embarrassing for you in that situation. If you've led them to believe something that's not true, and then you're having to backtrack, that also doesn't feel great.
Yeah. I mean, the prep work before even going to see a client is crucial. If at all possible, get to see accounts, tax comps before going to see them. Obviously, the due deal on the client themselves, how big are they? Are they part of a group? Where the R&D lies, and then, I suppose going forward, where the actual R&D work is taking place will be very important as well, because with new legislation coming in next year, that if you're doing your R&D work offshore, none of that cost will actually be eligible anymore. So it's about understanding the background of the company before you actually sit down and discuss the projects with them. But as Jen pointed out, it is their claim. It's not for us to lead them or force them down a road. They have to understand that what they do, falls within the guidance that HMRC set out. And as we spoke about, Jen and I, yesterday, and Sue's, the first thing I used to do when I went to see a client, it was like, okay, Mr. Dr. PhD, forget what you know about research and development, because all we're really concerned about is the criteria that HMRC have set out. So every meeting that I used to have was like, forget about what you think R&D is. We need to fit it into these categories here that HMRC have laid out for us, which is a project seeking an advancement. The project must encounter technical uncertainties, and they mustn't be readily deducible to a competent professional or available in the public domain. So it's everything else after that point is relevant to what we're going to talk about. But if it falls outside of that scope, then it's completely irrelevant.
Absolutely. And that leads us beautifully actually to our next point, which is on cooperation. And I couldn't think of any better way to express this in one slide, was just you're working with your client, not for your client, which might seem counterintuitive. Obviously, you want to take the grunt work away from your client. You want to make this process as easy as possible, but you have to work with them, alongside them. You cannot prepare a claim for a client, an end user, without their full knowledge, cooperation, and working with them. And I think actually Suze hears a lot about maybe the less best practice, the worst practice ways of doing this. I don't know if you want to jump in here, Suze, with some of what you hear from prospects.
Yeah, I think the one we touched on, the most terrifying one that we've touched on, and that I do hear more often than what you could imagine, is the actual client not being given sight of the report before it's submitted to HMRC. So our best practice and our sort of advice would dictate that, the client obviously needs to review what's going to be submitted and go through a sign-off process, a full QA sign-off process with the provider that they're working with. But yes, I've heard on many occasions that clients don't even get sight of the report, never see it, and it's considered by the provider as their IP, and that's why they don't want to share it. But as we discussed yesterday, it's the client's submission, it's the client's claim, so they have every right to have access to that and a copy of that, presumably, as well, so that they can keep that for themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, if we're talking best practice, the best practice way to do any claim is to assume that HMRC are going to inquire into it. Prepare everything as if HMRC are going to look at it in detail. I'm going to want to speak to your client. So you can then project yourself forward to this scenario where you've prepared a claim, the client hasn't even read it, they haven't seen the numbers, they don't know anything about it, and then HMRC are asking them questions about that claim. Like, it's indefensible at that point. You cannot defend a claim if your client hasn't been fully on board with it, hasn't cooperated with it. I have heard of companies that will have a 5-minute conversation with a company, almost as a sales call. And then the next thing they do is they follow up with a report and numbers. So they'll get the publicly available information about that company and just say, here's your claim. It's done. Do you want to, pay me £5,000 and then we'll submit it for you? And that is, as Sue says, it's terrifying. There's no way on earth that claim can be in any way accurate or robust or stand up to any kind of scrutiny. And I think, did you have some points, some experience of this kind of thing as well, Ian?
Yeah, scarily very recently, actually, as in within the last month, I've heard of a couple of situations with just that, both somebody being told without doing any kind of groundwork as to technical aspects of a project, they were told that your claim value would be X amount of money. And that's purely based on them going off, well, bit of a back of a fag packet calculation on, they've got 25, 30 odd staff. They're on about 20 grand, 25 grand a year each. So therefore, chances are I could get away with shoehorning them into this amount of a claim, but there was no technical basis for that. And also a different kind of a scenario where, as Sue's touched on, where claims were being submitted without actually been signed off, not just signed off by the client, but no visibility of a claim report. I mean, that claim report should be the property of the claimant themselves, not the preparing agent. And I suppose going forward, when we have to name agents and stuff like that on the reports themselves, that might become a little bit more, it might weed out rogue agents and that type of thing. But to not know what somebody has put your name against and submitted to HMRC, that at the end of the day, it's the claimant that's going to get the phone call from HMRC should it go to inquiry, and they don't even know what's in the report. Mm-hmm. That to me just is all very, very, very suspect, and it's very, very bad, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it. That anybody kind of carries out that kind of practice.
Yeah, it's definitely. I have heard the absolute nightmare where claims are just done without the claimant company even having any knowledge at all until the money is paid out, which would make me very, very uncomfortable. There's an interesting question popped up here just about the software itself. So the way that, for anyone that doesn't use WhisperClaims, there is a functionality that allows our users to invite their clients to come in and review the information that's been provided and all that kind of thing. So someone's just asking whether, is that documented? So right now, no. But it's something, obviously, to comply with the changes coming in next year, is something we're looking at, because from next year, all claims are going to have to be signed off. We don't quite know what signed off means, but the announcement is that they have to be signed off by the claimant company. So obviously it's going to be completely impossible to submit a claim without someone's knowledge. But But yeah, it's something we're looking at introducing ourselves, is to give people the ability to potentially even get signatures from their client on claims, so that we can make sure that all that is tied off. But yeah, it's absolutely vital that you're working in cooperation with your clients, not just doing it for them. So the third point I want to talk about was consistency. So I said there's no right or wrong here. And then when I wrote that, I was like, well, there's definitely wrong. But there's lots of different versions of right. It depends on the company that's doing the claim, how they work with their clients, what the relationship is like. There's lots of different things here. But the key thing is you need to be consistent, because then you know you're asking the right questions every single time, that you're checking that their SME status is still what you expect it to be, that they haven't had any grants. You're not making any assumptions, taking anything for granted, anything like that. And when I was trying to think of the absolute key stages, obviously you need to have a structured way of questioning your client. So that can be that you have a written down thing. You've just got a really practiced set of questions you know you ask every time. When I first started doing this, we had a printout of a sheet that we just were supposed to go through in every technical meeting and just tick boxes, just so we knew we had covered everything every time. And it was a really good kind of memory aid as you sat there to be, oh wait, sorry, can I just double check this with you? So some kind of structure around the way you're questioning and making sure you're covering everything off. We would say obviously it's vital. It's not mandated yet. It will be from next year, but technical narrative, best practice is that you produce one. Putting in just numbers is a very risky way to do it. And a costs breakdown, so that again, if HMRC come to ask questions about the numbers, you've immediately got something you can show them. And obviously, as we're banging on about all the way through this, having your client review and sign off is really, really important. Now, Ian does do some work on the side. We're fully aware of this, but he does do some claims himself. So do you want to talk us through your process and how you do work with your clients, Ian?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a bit of a WhisperClaims sales pitch. One of the great things about using the app is the fact that it is almost like a checklist, as you said, about having that kind of crib sheet kind of printed out and kind of ticking off the boxes. By using the app, it's forcing you to ask these questions because you need to answer before you can go forward to the next stage. So it's a really good kind of tool to use in those situations. That's, I suppose, my blatant sales pitch over with. But in terms of the structure of the meetings themselves, as I touched on earlier on, the first thing I would always do is just say, look, Dr. Research and Development Scientist, please forget what you know about research and development for the next kind of 2 to 3 hours, because we need to fit it into these categories here. And then going back to what I'd mentioned about just numbers only and coming up with a figure, that's just absolutely ridiculous, because we need to understand the technology and the advancement from the client's baseline to where they are after the project was finished. Because effectively, if we don't know where their baseline technology was and where they've gone to now, there's no basis for a claim at all. Just because they're in a particular industry where you expect to find it is not a guarantee that there is actually R&D there. Just because they did a claim last year and were successful at it, even if it went to inquiry, for want of a better word, doesn't mean that next year they will have a claim, because their baseline technology has increased year on year, because where they finished off last year is effectively an advancement of where they were the year before. So you just repeating the same projects year to year to year, or the same type of projects year to year, is a really risky business as well. So from my own perspective, I would always sit and speak in a lot of detail about the actual technology, what challenges they faced during the projects, how they attempted to overcome the uncertainties within those projects. Did they find a solution, or are they still working towards a solution, or did they scrap it entirely because they weren't able to come up with a solution? What was their process of going through those phases? Who was involved, and why was it difficult to overcome in that sense? Why it was difficult to overcome is one of the most important parts of the whole thing, because if it's a simple solution, even if it's, well, yeah, we'll find a solution. If it's, you try something and it works the first time, it's really difficult to argue that there was R&D in it, to be honest. So what was difficult about it is one of the most important things. It's only after that point that you can actually go away and actually start to even be concerned by numbers. Because if you don't have any projects that qualify, numbers are absolutely irrelevant in that sense. And then, producing the technical reports. My ones were always quite structured, so I would have almost like a kind of a set of boxes where I would need to fill in kind of hints and tips as I was going along to ask relevant questions of the technical people in the meeting. And then once that's all done, it has to go back to the client for sign off, both by their accounts and by their technical team as well. That's, I can't stress how important that is, because without that, they're just walking into an R&D claim blind.
Yeah. And I think one of the key points to me is what you just said around, you can't, or it's almost just no point starting to gather costs until you've assessed projects. And I know some people will try and do costs up front, or simultaneously with doing the technical side of things. But having tried many different ways of this, it's just, you just end up in this place where you've kind of, if nothing else, expectation management is really, really important during R&D claims. And if you start looking at numbers and assuming all the products are eligible before you've actually got into them, you're going to end up in a place where you have to keep reducing the amount you're telling your client is going to be their benefit. And that doesn't feel great either. But yeah, definitely just keeping it structured, working with them to and fro, accepting that it will take a certain amount of time as well. You can't rush these things, I would say. I mean, you can. I think the minimum time I've taken to do a claim is 2 days, because it was hard deadline, and that was 2 days of solid back and forth with the client. A week is possible, but when I used to as a consultant, you just accepted that most claims took a month to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Some of them would take forever because clients go cold, but it's important to take that time. There's quite often that you'll get almost to the end of a claim and someone comes along and says, oh, wait a minute. Actually, the FD's just come in and said that wasn't a cost for that project, or actually that one was subcontracted. That wasn't something we did in-house, or whatever it is. Taking the time so that everybody has their input as well, I think, is really important. And as Ian says, including both financial and technical people makes it a lot easier. Sometimes, obviously, with the client, it's not possible to do that, but where you can, it's really, really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Jen, we've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
That says, have either of you experienced an instance where a client is adamant that the work they've carried out complies with 81900, while you feel unsure even after explaining the guidelines in detail?
Yes. I'd be very surprised if there's an R&D consultant or advisor in the country who hasn't had that scenario where you explain it and they say, yeah, my project fits. And you go, are you sure? It doesn't feel like it fits. And you do this to and fro. And then at a certain point, it is a difficult ethical decision of what to do. It is the client's claim, as we say. If they are absolutely insistent, then either you have to walk away and let them submit it themselves without your input, or you include that one project on the basis that they've got other eligible things that you do believe in. And that one project, you're like, well, if you absolutely have to have that project in, I don't believe in it. I'm going to caveat this heavily. I'm going to tell you it's not eligible, but it's your claim. It's not an easy place to be. It's easier when you go to a company up front and you know for sure they're not eligible. And that's fine, because then you can just say, look, I can't do a claim for you because you're not eligible. But when you get into individual projects or individual pieces of work alongside other eligible things, I think that's probably one of the hardest things. I don't know if you've been in that situation, Ian.
Yeah, I have. I can be quite persuasive. It's just, again, we're the people who are getting paid to be there as the professionals from the tax side, from the R&D side of things. And it is just about standing ground sometimes and kind of going, look, I really don't believe and I really don't feel comfortable that this is genuine R&D. I'm just pushing back. And I think the number of times I've done it, I think I've only really ever had one negative experience to that, where the client has actually pushed back and kind of go, right, fine, don't worry about it. The rest of the time it's been, okay, I appreciate your honesty with this, and you are looking out for my best interest. And yeah, I am paying you to give me the best advice. anybody can go along and say, yeah, chuck it in there, be fine. Do you want the best advice, or do you just want somebody who's a yes man? So I will push back on these things, to be fair.
Yeah. I would say 99% of the time I push back, and there's that 1% where you have to just throw your hands up and say,
yeah,
it's your risk. We can't do anything about it.
So much. Yeah.
And that does lead us beautifully into the final point, if I can get my slides to progress, around openness. So again, working with your clients, you need to be open. Everybody's saying, if you include that project, it's not eligible, and I won't be able to defend that for you. And actually being direct about what's ineligible and what isn't. As I've said here, it can be just as valuable to your client to be told they're not eligible as to be told they can make a claim, because in the marketplace, the way it is at the moment, they will be being hounded by providers who will claim for pretty much anything, who aren't keeping in line with the criteria, who aren't following the guidance. They need someone that they can trust that just says, look, you are not eligible. And that's okay. It's okay to not be eligible, but having someone actually tell them directly can be such a breath of fresh air when they're getting phone calls 2 or 3 times a week saying, you can claim, you're in this sector, you can definitely claim. Just having someone knowledgeable and trustworthy say that, it can be really good for your relationship with them. And as we've said all the way through, the claim belongs to your client. So they need to be able to make informed decisions about what to do. So what to include, whether to even submit it, whether what they have is eligible, how much to claim, what to include, everything like that. You need to be giving them the knowledge and being open about it, about the risks, the rewards, and all that kind of thing of making a claim. And it swings back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, where, again, these providers that aren't open about it, they're just leaving their clients open to such massive risk from HMRC. I mean, people will ask me what the risks of making an R&D claim are, and in the kind of small sense, well, they're really small. I mean, HMRC inquire into it, you could just withdraw it, pay the fines, walk away. But what you don't want is for your client to end up with HMRC saying, right, we'll do an aspect inquiry. We'll look at all of your tax affairs for the last 7 years. Could you spend weeks and weeks and weeks working with us, pulling out every invoice you've ever received? We need to see that. Even if they come through it unscathed, it's still a huge amount of time and effort on your part and your clients to defend anything from HMRC, and leaving them open to that risk just doesn't feel worthwhile. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this, Ian, about the need for that openness and honesty in this area.
Yeah, again, you've kind of hit the nail on the head that, it's your client that's going to be sat in front of HMRC during the inquiry. It's a really uncomfortable place to be. Some of them are fine, if you can kind of get to a point where they're satisfied with your answers up front, then fine. But I mean, I see so many claims kind of going through where I would see it as not a particularly eligible industry, but somebody has tagged something onto the back of it just to force a claim through to get money back. Usually that bit that's bolted on is software. I don't know, is it that people think that software is this magic thing that always goes through as an R&D claim, but I've seen claims been made for restaurants, bars, as a software claim. And the risk of that is that if HMRC sit and look at it, and they'll see that the company is a hospitality industry, there's not a lot of science and technology and advancements in science and technology in hospitality. So it's one of those things that kind of flags up immediately with HMRC. And they look into it and they kind of see software. They kind of, well, who is this company? Where is their competent professional in software? So if I go into a chain of restaurants or a small independent restaurant, I'm going to go, hello, can I speak to your software developer? They're probably, sorry, we're a restaurant. But that's exactly what HMRC are going to do. They're going to turn up on your doorstep, go, can I see your software experts? And I go, oh, well, I've got a chef in the back. Will he do? He was the one that worked on the claim. And I think it's just that understanding that your client is going to be sat in front of HMRC. So we need to kind of rein them in and just kind of go, right, okay, if I was a software developer, yes, it might be difficult, but we're not software developers. So therefore, it's not an eligible claim for me in that sense. So just be mindful of that, really, is kind of, it is, again, it belongs to the claim belongs to them. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think there can be a bit of a sort of reflecting on the need for openness in this area, I think there can be this fear sometimes, and almost like a hoarding of knowledge in some of the providers, where there's that fear that if you teach the client, if you're open with them about how you're doing the claim, if you're open with them about the rules, they might go away and do it themselves.
Yeah.
And I would say that that's never been my experience, because it's not around knowledge. Like, anyone could sit and read CIRD and work out how to do it and do a claim themselves. It's the time and that comfort that you get from working with someone who knows what they're doing. In the same way that I could theoretically do the accounts and tax comps for our company if I read enough, I wouldn't feel confident ever doing it. I am quite happy to have someone else take the time and use their expertise to advise me on what to do. That is excellent. And it's the same with an R&D claim. You know, you don't need to hoard your knowledge and keep everything secret, keep the report to yourself. It's not gonna, your client's still gonna come back to you next year if you do a good job, if you follow these kind of best practice guidelines and actually produce a robust claim and you work with them openly. They'll come back because they trust you, and you give them that comfort and that ability to sort of rest easy that their R&D claim is eligible. They're not going to have HMRC come knocking, as Ian says, or even if they do, then they'll be able to defend it. They'll know you'll be in their corner. And that's just so important, especially given, as I say, these kind of smaller, less ethical providers that we see popping up that don't follow that and are kind of in some ways leading R&D tax. They've got this really dodgy reputation as this, you know, cash cow, and you can just put anything in, and it means that I think legitimate claimants actually are becoming more and more reluctant to put in a claim because they think it's a dodgy thing to do, and it's not. So it's trying to almost keep the reputation of the scheme as well. It's a legitimate scheme. It's perfectly reasonable to use as long as nobody's abusing it, I suppose. And that's where we're coming in with the best practice, is just know enough about it to not be abusing it, know enough about it to make sure that your client will get through this and have a defensible claim. I think what we'll do is pause here a moment. I think Susan's got a few bits to talk about, and then we'll go back to the last few questions and anything else anyone wants to ask.
That's fine.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to skip that because we've kind of covered it.
No worries, Jen. All right, well, just as Jen said, just before we go to, we've got a couple of questions. So if anybody wants to add some more while I'm talking away, please go ahead and we'll come to them in just a moment. Just our usual few reminders really for everyone on the session today. First of all, our training, we run a monthly fundamentals of the R&D tax scheme training course. It's for anybody who is either new to the scheme or also suitable for anybody who is just looking to brush up on skills, become equipped with even more expert knowledge about eligibility, the scheme, and some of its nuances. And it is also run by Jen and Ian as well. The session does have limited spaces, so please do book swiftly because they do tend to sell out quite quickly. The second thing, number 2, is our YouTube channel, which has been live since the beginning of the year, which has all of our video, podcast and collaboration content in one place for you to watch back and enjoy. If you are a subscriber to WhisperClaims, you can access the previews via our exclusive Insights channel. And if there's any subscribers on today who don't have that and would like it, please just drop me a message and I will organise that for you. And finally, if anybody is joining us today and is interested in seeing a demo of the app, please contact me directly or use the link to our book a demo page on the website. I'm just putting the links to everything that I've just mentioned there in the chat box just now. So please do have a quick look at that. I'm just doing that just now as we speak, and you'll be able to access everything from there. That's me.
Thanks, Sus.
Do you want to take the questions?
Sure. Yes. The first one I can see actually is saying, do we have any good phrases when speaking with a client that have activities to be eligible, but they can't see that or understand how the scheme could work for them? What are your phrases, Ian?
Tell me why it wasn't an easy solution. Tell me why the first thought in your head wasn't the correct thought. That's probably the best way I can do that. What was difficult about it? Why couldn't I figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I need you to tell me what the answer is?
Yeah, it's weird. Whenever someone asks me that, I picture myself in front of an engineer, because it's always engineering clients that do this, of like, nothing, we don't do any R&D. We definitely don't do R&D.
Yeah.
But then I usually dig into, okay, what failed? Like, what could you not do this year? where did you overspend? And especially if you've got the finance guy in the room, that's a really good one, is where did you overspend? Where did you lose money? And another really good one can be, what did you do this year you wouldn't want your competitors to know? What did you achieve that you wouldn't want your competitors to know about? And that could be quite a nice way to just kind of get them talking, especially as those reluctant ones that are very much like, nah, it's just our bread and butter. We don't do anything against R&D. So just kind of focus on cost overruns, as you say, the difficult things, why things were difficult, why, you sitting there couldn't do it, that kind of thing.
Engineers are a nightmare to work with because, but they're great, don't get me wrong, but there's always a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as they're concerned, it's just that, well, I'll get there. It's not difficult. I don't want to tell you it was difficult because they're generally quite humble people in that sense, but there will always be a solution to the problem, and they don't see that right. Well, actually, your thought process from that point onwards is actually qualifying R&D time potentially. So talk me through your process of overcoming the problem you had. So yeah, it is almost like kind of shaking them and kind of like, tell me.
Yeah. And I have to admit, I've had people, so kind of the complete flip side to what we were just talking about, who even after I've explained absolutely everything, I've gone through their projects with them, I've assessed them for eligibility, and I am happy that they're eligible. I did have one client that at that point just didn't want to claim. They just didn't, no matter how much we explained, how much comfort we gave them, they were not happy. And all we could do is walk away at that point and say, okay, look, it's for you to make this decision, not us. So sometimes there's nothing you could say, there's nothing you can do. They just won't believe in it. And that's unfortunately where you've got to stop. Yeah.
I've had exactly the same situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one that got asked a little while ago, I'm just going to read this. I have a couple of clients who are SMEs with grants and I think end up with a part RDEC claim, part SME claim, as the qualifying expenditure overall is greater than the value of the grant. The question is how to go about processing that, and specifically what boxes need to be filled in the tax return. I realized as I read this through, this is not really something we can answer as we go through. Yeah, I think what we could do potentially is signpost you to some resources around actually how you do the claim. I'm not an accountant. Ian is also not an accountant, but has more experience with the accounts at the end of this than me. I couldn't tell you exactly which boxes go in the tax return. But we can send you some resources as to how to do that.
Does John want to drop us a message directly in the chat box with your email address, John, and we'll get that over to you afterwards.
Cool. Thanks, Suze. Okay, someone else has said, when conducting an interview with a client, are your interviews open-ended or are they somewhat closed with a scope to explain technology where necessary?
Well, absolutely, they need to explain the technology. I mean, they're open-ended insofar as I start the ball rolling with them by saying, right, the criteria is project, advancement, uncertainties, competent professional, public domain. Now, talk to me about the projects. And sometimes you need a kind of a little bit of a lead down the line of, right, to give you an idea, talk about the projects that you had thought would be straightforward, you'd be finished in 3 months, and actually 7 months down the line, you're still working on that project. That's probably a really good indication that you came across a technical uncertainty. So let's talk about that and that type of thing that's going on at the moment. But it's let them talk. Sometimes you need to kind of channel them back in a little bit to kind of go, I understand, but what was difficult about doing that? Because we obviously need to explain to HMRC what was difficult about it. But I let them kind of just talk openly and kind of quite open-ended in that sense. That may not be everybody, but that's how I conduct it.
Yeah, I used to do open-ended questions and then nudging as they started to go through their answer of, okay, what was difficult about that? Can we go back to that thing you said? What was hard, and just, but if you closed questions tend to mean that you only get the answers that you've asked for. And if you let people talk, they tend to ramble on to the point where you can get to the core things that you need them to tell you. So you might have to listen to 5 minutes of the commercial benefits of something. And then they say, oh, but then we did this thing. And you're like, oh, right, let's talk about that. So yeah, I would definitely say open-ended, kind of just a bit more conversational.
Yeah.
We've also got someone saying, I think same person, how do you go about collecting the information? Would you do a questionnaire or an interview? And I think we've I mean, generally it's an interview. It's not, I think you can start out, I know that some providers will start out with a questionnaire and then delve into that. But especially with clients who are a bit naive about the scheme, who haven't done this before, they won't even necessarily know the thrust of what you're trying to get to in a questionnaire. It's very, very hard to word questions openly enough that you'll get the information you need to be able to make that kind of judgment. So it's very hard to do it without some kind of conversation with your client, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to send in advance of, say, the actual on-site meeting, when we used to do on-site meetings, I used to send like a kind of a spreadsheet with just tell me about a little bit about the project you've worked on, and then that kind of gets a flavor of what they've been doing, and then with a little bit of what was difficult about it, so that we can focus our attention a little bit more when we actually are on site and speaking about them. Okay, I see what you did there. What was that? What you said it was difficult, but why was it difficult? You know, for this reason. If I went to one of your competitors, would they be able to do it? You know, and it's just about kind of leading them to answers, I suppose, really. But yeah, that's how I would carry out.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm trying to. Got a lot of questions still coming in.
We're actually just running a bit over time. If everyone's happy to stay, we'll go another 5 or 10 minutes. If Jen and Ian, if you're both happy to keep going, we'll power through. Should we try and stick to the ones that are specifically about claims and best practice and claiming? We've got a lot of questions about how to calculate things, guys. We are limited with time, but what we'll try and do is mop up anything afterwards. So Jen, there's one from Brian. I can see there, Brian Crawford. Should we go with that one next?
Yep.
Where a client sorry.
No, go ahead.
Where a client insists on filing a claim for a project that is clearly not eligible, is it advisable to keep a track of the conversation, even having them send a letter as proof that it was their decision?
So again, the best outcome of this is that you persuade them not to put it in, or that you walk away. It's a wee bit easier, obviously, if you're a consultant rather than an accountant doing this. If you're not doing the submission, you can kind of wash your hands of it. As an accountant, it's much more difficult because you are then essentially submitting information to HMRC through the tax return that you don't believe is correct. So do everything you can to make sure that you don't end up in this situation. If it comes down to essentially a difference of opinion, if they're saying, no, I understand the rules and I still think this product is eligible, whether you say it is or not, then I've known other providers, other people that I've worked with, get that in writing, that you just say, look, I don't think you should do this. Clearly we've got a difference of opinion. If you want to include it, that's fine, but I need it, recorded that I don't agree with this. So don't get yourself into that situation if you can, but if you do, having some written record that you disagreed might help down the road. Who knows? But the best thing to do, and especially if you're responsible for doing the submission, would be to persuade your client not to include that, because you don't want to be putting information into a tax return that you don't think is correct.
Yeah, I've seen, just to add on to that, I've seen emails from accountants to HMRC to say, with regards to this submission, I was in no way involved in that, not believing that there is an eligible R&D there, and just leaving it at that. So that's their hands washed on it. At the end of the day, if it goes for inquiry, you're probably going to earn a fee from, sitting in the inquiry and managing the tax affair. But I mean, that's beside the point. But
just to be clear, for anyone that's not done this, the time and effort that goes into inquiry you can never charge enough to cover that. It is not a money-making thing. It is purely a cost-covering thing when you're taking a fee for defending an inquiry.
How about Timothy's one next? Yep. There's a discussion of HMRC seeking to pre-authorise claims before they can be processed. Do you have any insight on this?
So, to be honest, no. All we know is whenever it was it March, the announcement was purely that people might have to get some kind of authorization to claim. We don't know what that means.
Yeah,
it was a single line.
Yeah. It's still up for debate at the moment, because a lot of R&D claims, you don't know you're going to claim for R&D until you actually hit that technical uncertainty mid-project. So how you would have been able to notify in advance that you were going to have a problem that you didn't know was going to come up in the first place is very, very, very much up for debate. So
it's even around, there's no information on whether it's you're informing HMRC that you're going to do R&D, or just that you're going to claim for it, or that you're about to submit a tax return that includes R&D. We just don't know anything at all yet. There should be an announcement sometime in the autumn, and we'll obviously be on it and, send that out to all of our users as quickly as we can once we have more information. But yeah, right now it's very ambiguous.
We've got one from Rachel that was just picking up on one of the points you guys made just before. Did the client who didn't want to claim, even though you said they were eligible, explain why, and how do you deal with this, please?
It's the one I had basically just, no matter what I said or how I explained it, didn't fully believe in it. It wasn't a huge benefit. It's probably somewhere between 5 and 10K. I can't remember the exact numbers. And they just didn't feel the risk was worth it. They didn't want to potentially attract the attention of HMRC. They just didn't want to do it. They were very, very risk averse when it came to their finances, and they just weren't comfortable. So we didn't get into a kind of debate of the finer points of CIRD or anything. It was purely, I know you think we're eligible, we're just not comfortable, was essentially the conversation. I don't know with yours, Ian, whether it was more of a detailed thing.
No, it was a long time ago. It was probably about 2012 or 2013. So in not the early stages of R&D, but in the kind of the first big wave of people jumping on board with it. And I was dealing with a family business, engineering in the water industry, basically. So really, really, really eligible, had a lot of engineers, a lot of really good qualifying work, but just a small family business based in a kind of a rural area. The finance director was the son, completely on board with it, got it, understood it, and he was all over it. We did the meetings. We basically did everything, put the package together. We were submitting it as well because we're an accountancy firm. And when we went to sign off, the managing director, who was the dad, completely risk averse, didn't want to put the head above the parapet. It was, I want to say, for 1 year, it was nearly 100K benefit. It was a big claim, and he kind of goes, "No, this can't be right," and basically chinned it at that. Just nothing we could do. It was just, without his sign off, we couldn't submit the accounts on his behalf. Mm-hmm. So we had to agree to just drop it.
It's an interestingly common conversation, especially with that kind of family company of, I've been running this company for 40 years. I've never had a question from HMRC. I've never had any run-ins with them. And it's almost like they've got such a kind of long term, we've never had to talk to HMRC. They're just so scared of doing something now that's going to sort of create that problem. And I think it's an interesting one because in the end, inquiries they're work and they're difficult. But if you've put in a claim that's eligible, HMRC aren't necessarily unreasonable about it. They're not out to get you. They just want to clarify the points about it. And I think that's another really nice thing to do when you're working with clients, is to don't teach them to fear HMRC. They're not the enemy in this. But inquiries are just hard work regardless. It's putting extra effort into something you've already done. And that's what you want to avoid. It's not the HMRC going to be out to get anyone. It's not pitchforks and flaming torches or anything.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
I think the majority of the rest of the questions, guys, are not quite related to the subject for today. So do you want to do a couple more? Should we try and mop those up afterwards?
I think we've probably mopped them up after. I think it's probably at this stage better.
Okay, well, that's it for today, guys. I can see a few people have left, and we've had some lovely thank you. So thank you to everyone who's joined and sent over a message. That's us for today. Really appreciate the engagement from the audience as usual. Those questions were fantastic. Sorry to anyone who we haven't had time to get to today. Hopefully we've given you lots to think about as usual. If anybody has any questions that spring to mind following today's session, please do just get in touch. And as always, we love to hear your feedback. And if there's any subjects or topics that you want to hear us talk about, we would be very happy to cover those at some point during the year. So have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.